أوند وشميا نتقداش شماخ تأتي ملكوتاخ نهوي سوينخ إكند وشميا أبر حولان لحمة تسنكان يومنا واشوقلان حوبين إكند داب حنان شوقن لحيوين لا تانا لنسيونا إلا قصا من بيشة مثل دي لاخي ملكوثة حي لو تشبحتا العالم عالمين Amen. Well, this is part 2 of what we started a couple of weeks ago about what differentiates Jesus from the rest of the holy writings, all the people who came before him and a lot of the people who came after him. And he preached the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven. That was his core focus of his life, of his ministry. And as he declared himself, that's what he opened with, and that's what he continued to build in his few years with his followers, apostles, disciples, and his supporters. Once he was gone, it was that the movement started immediately changing, in some cases expanding on the good stuff that he did, and in some cases reverting back to some older ways and developing some new teachings that are not necessarily based on the foundation that he set up. So what I talked about last time I spoke was why am I in this work? I was sharing with you the core pieces that keep me at this work, and then I also shared towards the end of the session that I'm gonna go over the prophets, because the prophets in the Christian religions are usually used in a strange way. And a lot of people, even the people who read the prophets, sometimes struggle in placing them in the right setting. So where we left off is Jesus built on the prophets, and the prophets I mentioned, and I'll go through some, I might read pieces of the Bible, I might give you some verses to research yourself. But ultimately, I'm going to show you first how to look at the prophets and how to understand them in their world. That's very important, and I flashed that last time, and now I'm going to start there today by sharing the screen and showing you the timeline of the prophets. So I'm going to need my glasses for this because this has a lot of information. I think Dr. Erico developed this a while back, and he sent it to me handwritten. Actually, he did it handwriting, and I transferred it into a PowerPoint to get this. And by the way, we will have a good amount of time for Q&A. So if you see anything here, or based on what I spoke about last time, or anything else in the Bible, including the last couple of talks by Dr. Erico, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A, and I'll try to address them towards the end of the session. So the prophets, the way to look at this, it has a lot of information, and I know not everybody can look at this kind of thing, and often even myself, sometimes my eyes cross when I look at something like this. So I'll take a couple seconds here and explain how to look at it. The northern powers are the powers that were north of Israel and east of Israel, and you have to keep in mind that also the Egyptians had some interest in the area, the big empires around the small state that was known as the Kingdom of Israel, or Judea and Samaria and the Israelites. It had different names. All the way to, obviously you'll see here that I'm not going into like the time of Jesus, so I'm ending with the prophets, so that's where Dr. Erico stopped this timeline. So the northern powers were the Assyrians. This is from 800 BC. Then the Babylonians came into the picture about like 650 BC. They lasted a while until they were defeated by the Persians. and then during that time, Israel had the 12 tribes had split into two tribes, the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin, stayed kind of in what they call the southern state, or the kingdom of Judah. So this is this blue stuff. And then for a short while, the northern tribes went up. They set up shop kind of in the northern part of Israel, into Damascus and so forth. They formed different alliances. They were upset basically with Judah and Benjamin for controlling the temple kind of at a very simplistic way. So they split away. They said, okay, we can do better without you. But they got weak, and you see that, you know, they lasted a good chunk of time. They had a few kings. You see their kings, and during that time is where you see some of these prophets. So Jonah, and you see some question marks, because unlike today's history where everything is documented, you know, every picture you take has the date and time and location, GPS. A lot of these documents and a lot of these stories evolved over time, and there are enough clues in them to help the scholars try to figure out the era, the period of which kings they're talking about, what was happening politically. But so bringing all that information gives us an idea of where they were and which people they were speaking with. But as you can see, you know, Jonah was, you know, more because he had to go to Nineveh. Nineveh was part of the Assyrian Empire. That's where his struggle was. God was telling him, go enlighten people who are not part of your tribe, part of the Hebrews. And but again, you know, we today separate those people, but Abraham came from what we call Babylon, where the land where the Assyrians and the Chaldeans were. That's, you know, today's Iraq. So that when you see that relationship of people migrating this way and that way, or being pulled back, they're not going into like foreign land. They're going into tribes that were kin to them in many cases. So you know, this helps you kind of see that world not from the perspective of the religion how it evolved today and how it's taught today. This kind of gives you an idea that this is a small area of land that had a lot of connections together. There was no separation. That the separation was, in some areas it was desert, in some areas it was rivers that connected the areas. They're populated, they had trade routes. So it wasn't isolated. And today we see it also in countries. There's a country between Iraq and Palestine, Israel. You know, Jordan is there. That was not there. There was, you know, different kingdoms and smaller tribes in between. So when you look at it, that's then the northern powers that were in place, and those powers, the Babylonians were basically cousins of the Assyrians, and they when the Assyrians were getting weaker, the Babylonians took over. And then you see, this is where Nineveh fell. Then the Persians got strong and powerful, and they came and they defeated the Babylonians, and they released their captives. So you see, again, in this diagram, a lot of movement this way, where captivity and destruction, and they lost wars, and then sometimes we're seeing them coming back. And then Judah was in power. So you can see now that the Jewish people, because of their split, they had kings. And these prophets came in different times, and their prophecies and their advice and their struggles with the tribes around them, etc., were based on that time period. So that's why when you go look in the Bible and you see them like sequentially, you know, put there major prophets and minor prophets, you lose this perspective. You read it sequentially, and that this whole picture is lost without a lot of focus. So this is a good guide. You see also that the big books, the second Kings, Second Chronicles, which are almost identical. They have the different chapters are marked here of how those correspond also with the times and the prophecies and the news that was being communicated. So that, and a lot of the story of Israel and Judah and the split and stuff is captured actually in these books. But so layering Isaiah or Micah on top of Kings, and on top of the full effect of what was happening, the fall of Samaria, the end of that northern kingdom, but seeing why these prophets, again, we call some of these are minor prophets. This is all scholarly stuff. It wasn't meant to be. They had a mission, and they were advising their nation to do something, and that's why we see them, in that context. And each one of them had different mission, that they were coming to fix something or work with something or work with a specific king, work with the people. When the people were taken captive, as you can see here, to Babylon, and there was a destruction of the temple and so forth, the prophets had a role of keeping the people's spirit up, and there are also songs and things that they wrote in Babylon. So some of the stuff we see in Psalms and in Proverbs and so forth are also scattered because the people were in different settings. So this is why it's so important to get your hands on something like this if you're interested in learning about the prophets, or learning about how Jesus, see, right here is where we see kind of like the end of the prophets, about 400 BC or so, and then it went kind of quiet. And I talked about how during that quiet time, the people did not have a lot of like big prophets, spiritual advisors, because the nation had been near destroyed and scattered. And even though when they came back and rebuilt the temple and so forth, they didn't have the same dynamics. They didn't have the same freedom to self-govern, and the Persians were good to the Jewish people. So I'll take this off and I'll continue talking. And if you have any questions, this is a great time to kind of start putting them in the Q&A, and I can go back to it during the Q&A session if you have specific prophets you want to know a little bit more about. So that period of quiet, as I said before, it created almost a spiritual void. So when Jesus came and tried to catch up, he studied a lot of these writings. He studied the history. He references it in some of his talks. We saw last time that he used the prophet Isaiah as part of his declaration when he went and spoke at the temple in Nazareth, or at the synagogue in Nazareth. And his knowledge, also another thing that Jesus did, because again, the people now are under Roman rule. So a lot of the dynamics, even of what the prophets were going, that the Persians stayed as a power, but the Romans had defeated them and pushed them out of that area. And there were a lot of scrimmages all the way through even the early history of Islam, when the Muslims came from what we call today Saudi, Mecca and Medina and so forth, and pushed up north. A lot of their fighting was with the Romans. That the initial enemies were the Romans and the Persians, and they considered the Romans, though at that time the Roman Empire was a Christian empire. They considered them that they had veered away from true Christianity, because in Arabia they had Eastern Christianity, and they had a different way of looking at the teachings of Jesus, and they considered Jesus as a prophet, and they even honored his mom. So they had also picked up some of the early Eastern church teachings, and that influenced how they viewed Christianity. But they looked at Western Christianity, the Roman Christianity, as something that almost as bad as the people who did not know God, and they called them they called them infidels, because they had changed enough of the Bible, and they had adopted icons, and they built the churches had pictures of the prophets, and not the prophets, the apostles, pictures of the Mary, Jesus was on the cross. So that they felt all that was not true religion, not true to the tradition of Judaism and the tradition of Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet. For them, it wasn't the Son of God and that whole deity state that was added to Jesus, but was not accepted by early Islam, and I don't think it's still accepted to this day. Versus the Zoroastrian Persians were even worse than the Romans. So when the hordes of Muslims, the early fervor, the early believers, and so forth, went out and were trying to expand the nation, that's where they clashed, and they clashed with tribes, Arab tribes and Aramaic tribes that had already aligned with these superpowers. Same thing that was happening in the time of Jesus, that the Jewish people had come to agreement with the Romans. We govern this way, you govern that way, we collect our taxes, you collect your taxes on top of our taxes. So the people were under a lot of burdens. And Jesus had a view into all of this and was thinking, okay, we can, if you take any chunk of this history of his people, okay, as a Galilean Jew, last time I referred to him as a Palestinian Jew, but Palestine as a name, was probably not in use at the time when he was there. So he was more known as a Galilean Jew. And the Galilean Jews, you see, if you remember the picture, that the northern tribes had gone up, the Assyrians had come down, the Babylonians came down, and when those kinds of wars, if you read, they were bloody wars, and they tried to annihilate people and empty villages and burn them down. But also at the same time, they needed the wheat and the goodness that was coming, the fruits and so forth that were grown there, the olive and the olive oil. So they would bring some of their own settlers and they put them there. So that's why Galilee, as we look at its history and the Galilean people, they were viewed as less than perfect Jewish people. And that worked against Jesus, and they spoke slightly different Aramaic. Because again, the influences were coming from Babylon and less pure Old Hebrew, which was disappearing because of those captivities. So as they got pulled up to or pulled, east to Iraq, or northeast to Assyria, their language started getting lost in these in Baghdad and those capitals. So this is the dynamic that it's kind of like the pot that was boiling that ended up spitting out Jesus. And out of all of that and all the history that he studied and all the ups and downs of the prophets, and that's why I'm saying that if you look at the political dynamics on top of the internal politics between the northern tribes and the southern tribes. And even when they came back, when the southern tribes the northern tribes got defeated initially, and the prophets were pointing at them saying, you chose to leave the path of truth, to leave the path of Yahweh, and you aligned yourself with these other kings, the kings of in Syria and what we call today Syria, Aram, and so forth. So they would speak, and it's like, you need to come back. But then they were also struggling because the religion had moved into a temple religion. It stopped being a tribal religion. And I think I spoke many times before, and I'm not sure if I covered it last time, that when Moses instituted the religion, he instituted the priestly system. So that created a burden on the people, and I'm picking kind of like specific points where you can see the simple religion of Abraham and the early patriarchs, who were tribal leaders, basically, who took care of their tribe and tried to get along with the people around them, is becoming a national religion and an organized religion as well. So because of that, if you fast forward a little bit into the early stages when we hear about the establishment, Moses died before he got to the promised land. So as they got into the promised land, they had the Canaanites were there, the Perizzites were there. There were a lot of other tribes who were already occupying this land. It wasn't just empty. So they had to battle with them, and sometimes they defeated them and sometimes they lost. And through all of this, we see then the evolution where they go away. They initially installed judges, good, simple people who would actually go between the tribes and solve problems. Now, because they were fighting more organized nations like the Canaanites, they wanted their own kings. And Samuel was at the time where this hit and became a big issue. Samuel tried to warn them. It's like, if you put a power above you, if you put a king out of your own nation, first of all, the king is going to sit over all 12 tribes. And because they're now, just like the priests were, herding sheep, and they were gathering stuff, food, and planting some food. But then once you take them out of society and you make them strictly priests, I'm talking about the brother of Moses and his family initially, and the tribe of Benjamin became kind of also an extension of that. Then the society has to support that new structure. Same thing happened when they wanted a king, and Samuel, as much as he wanted them, finally he picked a king. And Samuel was a bit vain. If you read Samuel carefully, when he went to select the best man for the job, he picked somebody who was tall and handsome, but he had some psychological issues. Today, scholars talk about that as psychological issues. He was insecure. He was afraid of David. He was very, like, paranoid. But they needed somebody to stand and lead the armies against the other nations. So now they're shifting one more time. Now they have an organized religion, and now they have an organized government that needs castles, needs to collect taxes, needs full-time army, ready to defend the borders and go into battle. And all that comes out of the nation. So now we're going from a spiritual concept to a national political concept with an organized religion to back it up. And they mix the two together. So, and then you can see now that because they're becoming kind of more, attractive and have probably a flag and a headquarters and a castle and a temple for the religion, the other nations, as they came by, they're going to fight with Egypt, and they're going like, oh, there is a whole other nation, and they have borders and so forth. So they toppled them off and rolled over them. And there were moments where they almost disappeared. They took them into captivity. They scattered them. I remember watching a show almost 20 years ago now on National Geographic, where they were talking about the Pashtun tribes in Afghanistan. They tied themselves back to the original 12 tribes of Israel. So the Pashtun, who are now they're now Muslims, but they have a spoken law. So the law of the elders, almost the same concept that the Jewish people had even at the time of Jesus. It's like a law above any religious law. So you probably can find that episode on the internet these days. But so you can see how they scattered. That was one of their diasporas, because the Babylonians, they just got fed up with them. And then later, when the Romans came, and after Jesus predicted that. He said, if you're going to continue the same mindset, you're going to pay a price for it. And he warned, as part of his ministry towards the end, is warning his disciples and apostles, telling them, listen, bad times are coming. And he said, when it comes, these nations move quickly, their armies move quickly. That's why a lot of the visions that you see, like in Ezekiel and so forth, they have all these images of chariots with eyes on them and eagles and so forth. They're describing how these nations move between spies and the fast-moving armies. And now, hopefully, you have an idea of like, oh, they're not just, on page 800 of the Bible, so they must have come after Moses or after kings. They're actually lined up, kind of stacked this way and this way. So Jesus is seeing that lessons from history, and he's learning from them, and he's warning his new movement, very, very small fledgling movement. By the time he died, he didn't have like hundreds of thousands of followers. He had maybe a few hundred real followers, and then maybe a few thousand fans. And to take that and have the simple pillars that he built for them to follow, and then to survive the Roman destruction of Jerusalem and the Roman anger with the Jewish people, and then come out of that on the other side. And that's why they initially expanded eastwards, because it was a bit more friendly towards them, both as being, Jewish people. So when they went into early Persia, continued to India, used the Silk Road to go up into Central Asia, all the way to China, and eventually Japan. They were not aligning politically. They were not building armies. They're not setting a center for prayer and a temple to defend. They're not building castles for their kings. They were just the normal day-to-day folk. They were mainly traders and just normal people, farmers and shepherds and so forth. They stayed peaceful, that even the Romans, when they rolled over, they kind of looked over them. Eventually, the Romans noticed how dangerous that peaceful movement could be for an expanding nation. An expansionist colonial nation needs people to be angry and need to feel nationalistic and need to feel like the borders are important and so forth. So when you go to people and go like, hey, you want to fight the guy across the river because that's another nation, and you go like, no, I'm a peaceful person and I don't want to be involved. I just want to live a good life and I love you. It does not quite feed the recruiting system and the national pride that the Romans were building their nation on. And same thing with the Persians, and same thing with any other nations, eventually the Mongols and so forth. But even the Mongols, I think Dr. Eriko last time, read from a book about how the Mongols, with all their vicious nature, when they came from Central Asia into the West and into the East, what we call today the Middle East or the Near East, they were ruthless. They had they seemed like they're not cultured. They had their own form of culture and religion, but when they came, they rolled over everything, and they didn't. But then when they ran into the Christians in these cities that they were toppling, they were building pyramids of skulls. I mean, to scare the next town and to surrender. And sometimes even if you surrender, they didn't care. They didn't want the enemy to be behind them, so they slaughtered everybody. But somehow the teachings of Jesus, Eastern Christians maintained a good profile, and they were so well respected and educated. They were smart with money, they were smart with science, they were smart with politics, they were smart with history, that they were always incorporated into these nations. And that's the power that I think will continue to propel this movement forward. And that's the power that we need today, probably as much as we've needed it throughout this history. And that's why I stay motivated and I stay hopeful, is that somebody who believes this way, when they make it into the Senate, or be a runner in the Supreme Court, or be the clerk at the county, or wherever you are, right? And or the CEO or the janitor in a corporation, it doesn't. When you have that love, that clarity of your humanity that Jesus teaches in his gospel, when you're trying every day to live in the kingdom, have the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God as your governing entity above any nation, above any law, above any border, above any flag, above any alliance with anything, your family, your friends, your neighbors, your neighborhood, your town, your high school, your university, whatever you think you're aligned with, it's all fake. That the true alignment is a human alignment, is all of us, regardless of age, skin, color, nationality, language. All that is just symptoms of our human state. And that's how Jesus's movement continued to move and expand, and to live to this day, for us to use this awesome technology where, I have people probably all over the world I know listen to us on YouTube, and some join live with us from different countries and different parts of the world. And here in the US, we're scattered. It's a big country, and we're still coming to get a glimpse into this master teacher who gave us something that is so true and so speaks to our soul and gives us tremendous peace, and then motivates us to make the world a better place. That's the burden that we have, is every time you go to the supermarket, every time you're in line to drop your kid off or pick them up, or your grandkid, you are living in that space. So you're not getting angry, you're not getting frustrated, you're not honking, you're not pushing your cart harder into the next person or trying to cut them off. You are just saying, I love you all, and we're all in this together, and you are my family, and my true family, not just the one by blood that sometimes drive us crazy, and sometimes they're absolutely awesome. So this is the power of Jesus, and this is why this is so important for us not to just listen to it on Wednesday night or on YouTube and forget it. It's so important to take it and practice it, and you will fall, and you will slip, and you will get angry, and you will cuss. And all these are okay. Jesus, as part of the Jesus system, he said that you will commit a sin, which is just, you'll miss the target. Your intentions are good, but sometimes you get the wrong result, or you hit the wrong thing. It's okay. Repent, quit it. Right? His system was not unlike Moses. Moses and the early founders of the Jewish nation, you screwed up. There are a lot of crimes that they killed you. If you grew a goatee, they labeled you as a goat, not trying to get away from being a human, and you would have been stoned to death if you got caught. So that's a mindset that was tribal, primitive, that we have in the Bible. And that's why I said last time, and I'll say it again and again, do not try to reconcile Jesus. And I gave you the verses, and I guess you weren't here last week. So basically, Matthew 3, you can include some of early Luke, because to Matthew 27, verse 50, which is, we are told Jesus took his last breath. And even in that section, the scribes and the early movement had inserted some propaganda, some things that serve their purpose that are not necessarily aligned with Jesus. So even with that, you can even shrink it further. I'm expanding it a little bit because Dr. Errico last time, if you haven't heard it, I don't know if it's available publicly yet, but I'll release it soon. He did talk about how the early picture that they give us about Jesus, the young Jesus, was actually to show us how he was blossoming, and people were noticing that blossoming, that he was growing in wisdom. So usually a lot of those stories are, by scholars, by even sometimes by us. We shove them into there's no way to verify that stuff. But maybe the early writers spoke with the elders of Nazareth and the elders of the areas where Jesus was getting to be known. And they said, yeah, I remember that young kid. He was wise. He didn't get in fights. He was the peacemaker amongst his friends. He paid attention, obviously, and to study the history and so forth. And he paid attention to the prophets, and he picked up on what's good that the prophets were doing. He could have come back and said, let's kill everybody, let's rebel, which was a lot of what the messiahs, the chosen ones of Israel throughout their history, including a lot of the prophets, were about annihilation, about the success of the nation. So they would slip into that mode because they could not separate themselves from their tribe. That's the whole story of the prophet Jonah. You know, he was in a pickle for because God kept telling him, go enlighten people who are not, you know, who are not your tribe, who are, you know, the Assyrians. And he resisted that, and the more he resisted it, the more miserable he became. So that's, Jesus saw that, and he said, no, I'm not gonna walk down the street and point the finger at the Romans. I'm gonna love the Romans. And that's hard, you know, and that's why a lot of his people and Nazareth and the Sadducees and the Pharisees kept poking at him and kept trying to trap him as well with his enlightened teachings, because it was beyond their way. They were blocked in the boxes that they drew for themselves. So this is really why we do this, and I don't know how much more I can, you know, just expand on this, other than constantly continue to grow your practice, continue to meditate, continue to read, continue to study, but above all, continue to actually live a happy, positive life, and let that light shine on in every place you go to, and with everybody you interact with. Take a deep breath always and ask yourself, what is the teaching of Jesus that applies to this situation? And I put money on it that every time you will find yourself with something. And if you try to go pull something and reconcile it, you know, is it Jesus versus Moses, Jesus versus Isaiah, Jesus versus Paul, Jesus versus the apostles in many cases, you'll find yourself struggling, and you'll find that the religion does not make sense. And that's the big problem with today's religions in general, is they don't show you the maps I showed you. And there's got to be a map for Jesus and the early Christian movement. And it would look a lot like this one, you know, what Jesus came, what his times are, and then the early church. And you can almost split it into the Eastern church and the Western church, the expansion. There was an African church. I went through some of the book. I don't know if I have it handy here. Yeah, this book, not too long ago, I think earlier in the year. And this book talks about Eastern Christianity, and you can see how it's they viewed the world as they were expanding into the East and the West and so forth. It gives us a glimpse into that early movement and how they won and expanded and had so many centers of enlightenment, not of religion. They were enlightenment. They were constantly, people were going like, okay, wow, I'm excited about this. What can I do about it? And they go like, okay. And they didn't have bound Bibles. They had little stories, and they had to memorize a lot of things. That was the genius of Jesus. He gave them parables. He gave them one-liners in some cases, and it opened up their spirit. And it made them happy above all, even when they were persecuted. We hear that, or we read that they were singing, walking into persecution, because they understood that resistance would just make them and their oppressors and their families and their whole nation miserable. So they chose non-resistance. And that's what enlightened Gandhi, and that's what enlightened Tolstoy and Martin Luther King and Mandela. All these world leaders, they picked up Jesus's teachings and said, how can I apply this to a miserable nation that's under colonial rule, or to a Russian nation that was, you know, had a class of elitists, and later communists were saying there is no spirituality, there is no God, and everything is you know what you feel, and they built it on, you know, labor and so forth, and they were going like, but we have that spiritual side in us. Tolstoy did, he felt it, and he was persecuted by the church, and he was persecuted by the political system for these teachings, but he was at peace, and he continued to work on that. So and he communicated with Gandhi, and as Gandhi left South Africa and went to India and led a nation of God knows, there were probably 800 million then, against a small ruling British colonial power, but with non-resistance. And they could have, I mean, 800 million, they could have marched and killed all the British soldiers who were there. And Gandhi said, no, we can't go play their game according to that definition. We need to play a completely different game. We need to love them. We need to let them know that we are fully human beings and we have the right to live. We have the right for freedom, and you can't continue to abuse us. And eventually England packed up and walked away. And now, as an English citizen, you can go and visit and enjoy India, but you don't have to own it or feel to oppress its people to do so. And that's the world that we're seeing. Today, we're seeing some struggles that probably will lead into the same results, where we have at some point to hug and kiss and say that history will not rule us, but our humanity will rule all over us. And with that, I'm going to close. And I wish you a very, very happy Thanksgiving. This is a time to reflect on how in our case and the history of this nation, how the native tribes, when they saw the people who came and had nothing coming in from Europe, shared with them. We were told food and so forth, and eventually that relationship soured, and we had a horrible history for a while that hopefully now we can move past it and try to rebuild and continue to love one another. So I'm not seeing any questions. I'll give you a couple seconds. I'll go quiet, and if you have nothing to share, then I wish you a very, very happy holidays, since I'm not going to be with you. I see one coming, but I think it's a comment, not a question. Thank you. It is a comment. Who and when was Christmas created? Christmas is a bit complicated because it's a whole bunch of traditions. That was part of the lovely nature of that early Christian movement, because they had no definition. Think of Christmas as if you walked into a village that does not know Jesus from Adam, or Adam for that matter, and you go talk, you sit amongst them, which is what the early Christians did, and you saw that they had this lovely story about Santa Claus and so forth, and deer and reindeer, which, and believe me, in Galilee or Jerusalem, none of that existed. So, or the snow and so forth. And you instead of telling them, no, this is pagan and this is bad and so forth, you embrace it. And then it becomes part of your tradition. And there is a lot of good stuff there about community giving, gift giving, and so forth. Now it's more commercial and more stressful time for most of us. But that's, I think it came when Christianity expanded into Central and Northern Europe. That's where a lot of what we have in Christmas today comes from there. And they incorporated the early story of Jesus's birth. The timing of it seems like it matches well enough. So that's at least that's my understanding of where Christmas came from. Easter is slightly different, but again, Easter the same concept. We know that Jesus died around the Pesach, that Jewish holiday, according to the writings that we have. So when they went into and that's around the time of celebrating spring. And almost every nation, that the Persians to this day, they have their spring celebration. A lot of the European countries, different cultures, different historical events took place and celebrated during that time. So they incorporated, and that's one of the most confusing Christian event probably, because the celebration of spring is all about life and renewal and baby chicks and baby sheep and so forth. And then you have this, leading to it is this horrible 3 days of Jesus's life, of being captured and tried and crucified, dying a very violent death. But luckily, the early movement had also the idea of the resurrection of Jesus and the resurrection of the Christ in them, and the renewal of that movement, and coming out of that horrible loss of their leader. The early apostles picked up the pieces, picked up themselves and each other, and they said, those pillars that we learned from this master teacher are so important for the world. It's a new system, and we're going to not sit and cry in Galilee and be afraid that they'll catch us and kill us as well. We are going to live that good life that Jesus taught us, and they went out and expanded the movement. So that's why maybe you can reconcile, but yeah, eating chocolate eggs and bunnies and because Jesus died is not really the most compatible thing. But a lot of the holidays are built that way, and I love that about Christianity, that it can adapt. And instead of cursing people and killing a joyful occasion, they just incorporated it, even if it wasn't in the wrong time of for the movement itself. So those are the questions and the remarks. Again, happy Thanksgiving, and hopefully I'll see you on the 2nd of December. And anyway, happy holidays. It's a great season. Try not to be stressed. Try to remember Jesus's teachings, and give everybody around you a big hug and a big kiss, and tell them that you love them, because that's the most important thing that we can do with each other. God bless you, and thank you. Dr. Eric will be with you next Wednesday.